This is a homily for the 29th Sunday in Ordinary Time. The first reading is from the book of Exodus, chapter 17, verses 8 to 13. The Gospel for this Sunday comes from the Gospel of St. Luke, chapter 18, verses 1 to 8. To download the text of this homily as a PDF file, go to sundayhomilies.au. As you can see, we're coming towards the end of Luke's travel narrative as we draw closer to Jerusalem. The Sunday lectionary has devoted 19 weeks to what Jesus did and said during this pilgrimage to Jerusalem for the celebration of Passover. As you're aware, the Sunday lectionary chooses the first reading to complement the theme of the Gospel in one way or another. In today's Gospel, Jesus tells his disciples a parable about the need to pray continually and never lose heart. The first reading, chosen to complement that theme, comes from the book of Exodus. It is a story about a battle between the Israelites and the Amalekites at Rephidim. Under the leadership of Moses, the Israelites have left Egypt, but their long journey to the land of promise was not without trouble and conflict. Israel constitutes a threat to the peoples who already occupy the land they are passing through. When they reach Rephidim in the Sinai Peninsula, they are attacked by the Amalekites. The Amalekites were a nomadic confederacy of tribes that roamed the region of Sinai and the neighbouring wilderness. Moses commissions Joshua to prepare for battle. This is the first time that Joshua is mentioned in the Bible. Moses, accompanied by Aaron and Hur, views the battle from a nearby hill with the staff of God in his hand. From this nearby mountain, Moses raises his arms with the staff of God in his hand. This is a gesture of uncertain meaning, perhaps a gesture of prayer. As long as Moses keeps his arms raised, Israel has the advantage. But when he lowers his arms, the advantage goes to the Amalekites. So Aaron and Hur, standing on either side of Moses, support his arms. This is an image of how difficult it is to persevere in prayer without the support of others. What is the significance of Moses holding the staff of God in his hand? Undoubtedly, the same staff that he had used to perform wonders before Pharaoh, and the same staff that he had used to part the waters of the sea. New Testament scholar Terence Fretheim offers this observation. The staff, in and of itself, does not radiate power like an electrical shock system, so that Moses turns it on and off by raising and lowering it. It is a realistic symbol of the power of God at work in the situation. Yet God's power is not electrically conceived either. This suggests a symbiotic relationship between people and staff. So, raised hands, used elsewhere in the Bible, is a symbol of prayer, and raised hands holding the staff, a symbol of God's power, suggests that the victory is not won by military efforts alone. The symbiotic relationship between people and staff is a manifestation of God's power working in and through human effort. This symbiotic relationship is expressed in the old exhortation that we should pray as if everything depended upon God, but to work as if everything depended upon us. Pope Benedict once pointed out that Moses, with both arms lifted up in prayer, strikes a pose on the mountaintop much like Christ on the cross. The victory over the Amalekites foreshadows the far greater victory that Jesus achieves through his arms raised on the cross, the final and definitive victory over the prince of this world, the victory over sin and death. So today's first reading and the Gospel are both about prayer. You may recall that earlier in the Gospel, in chapter 11, the disciples asked Jesus to teach them to pray as John taught his disciples. Jesus taught them the prayer that today we know as the Lord's Prayer. Father, may your name be held holy. Your kingdom come. Give us each day our daily bread, and forgive us our sins, for we ourselves forgive each one who is in debt to us. And do not put us to the test. That is immediately followed by a parable about persistence in prayer. In the middle of the night, a man goes to the house of his friend with a request. My friend, lend me 3 loaves, because a friend of mine on his travels has just arrived at my house, and I have nothing to put before him. From inside the house the man answers, Do not bother me. The door is bolted now, and my children are with me in bed. I cannot get up to give it to you. We're then told that if the man does not get up and give the loaves for friendship's sake, persistence will make him get up and give his friend all he needs. Before we consider today's parable, which is also about persistence, let's spend a moment asking the basic question, what is prayer? But firstly, let me begin by saying what prayer is not. Prayer is not magic. It is not gaining what we want by waving a magic wand, by using a spell, or through incantations. And yet that seems to be how some people understand prayer. From time to time, I find that someone has left multiple copies of a novena to St. Martha in the pamphlet rack of my parish church. This novena comes with very explicit instructions. It is to be said on 9 consecutive Tuesdays. The recitation of the novena prayer must be accompanied by the lighting of a candle and the recitation 3 times of the Our Father, the Hail Mary, and Glory Be. Also, a copy of the novena prayer must be left behind in the church. Then we are guaranteed St. Martha grants anything, no matter how difficult, before the termination of the 9th Tuesday. Prayer is not transactional. This so-called novena to St. Martha reflects a very transactional view of prayer. I do certain things and say certain prayers, and God automatically grants my request. It's as if God were a vending machine. I put some coins into the machine, which is the equivalent of saying prayers. I then press the number which indicates the item that I want. In other words, I tell God what I want, and then the item falls into the tray below. God gives me what I prayed for. If that is a travesty of true prayer, how should we describe prayer? The Catechism of the Catholic Church, quoting St. John of Damascus, tells us that prayer is the raising of one's mind and heart to God. Prayer is communication with God, sometimes in words, sometimes in silence. And the word communication comes from the word communion, which means to be one with. So in prayer we seek to become one with God. But that doesn't always have to be in words. Come to think of it, human communication doesn't always have to be in words. I've often thought that a good test of how comfortable you feel with somebody else is this. If the two of you can travel together in a car for, say, half an hour, and neither of you says a single word, but neither of you feels in the slightest bit uncomfortable, that's a fairly good indication that you feel comfortable in each other's presence. However, if you've just met someone, it would be embarrassing if neither of you spoke at all during a half-hour car trip. Prayer, likewise, can be sitting silently in the presence of God. Prayer is also listening to God. Speak, Lord, your servant is listening. In prayer we also make requests of God. There are several petitions in the Lord's Prayer. Give us each day our daily bread. Forgive us our sins, and do not put us to the test. Prayer is also thanking God for all we have received through God's graciousness. The central prayer of the Mass is the Eucharistic prayer. Eucharist comes from the Greek word Eucharistia, which means thanksgiving. Prayer is also praise. The great hymn book of Israel and of the Church, the book of Psalms, is known in Hebrew as Tehillim, songs of praise. We also express our love for God in prayer. In prayer we seek forgiveness for sins. Prayers may be lamentations. In Mark's Gospel, Jesus prays from the cross, my God, why have you abandoned me?" And prayer can also be likened to a wrestling with God. The idea of prayer as a wrestling with God calls to mind a strange and enigmatic story about the patriarch Jacob, the grandson of Abraham. We find this story recorded in the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible. Jacob is on his way to meet his brother Esau, whom he hasn't seen in 20 years. It is night time, and Jacob is alone, having sent his entourage on ahead of him. He is alongside the river Jabbok in modern-day Jordan. The biblical text at this point is quite abrupt. Seemingly out of nowhere, a stranger appears. Jacob and this stranger wrestle until daybreak, with neither of them uttering a word. Who is this man? The Hebrew text uses the word ish, which means man. Where did he come from? What did the stranger want? Then the stranger speaks. "Let me go, for day is breaking." A suddenly belligerent Jacob refuses unless the stranger blesses him. The stranger replies by asking his name, and Jacob tells the stranger his name. The stranger then replies, "No longer are you to be called Jacob, but Israel, since you have shown your strength against God and man and have prevailed." That is the meaning of Israel, one who contends with God. Who was the stranger? The biblical text uses the Hebrew word ish, which means man, but Jacob realizes that it was not a man with whom he struggled. He named the place Peniel, which means, "I have seen God face to face and have survived." And that is a powerful image of prayer, wrestling with God. And often we're reluctant to do that. We seek the easy way out. We become victims of what is known as the streetlight effect. The streetlight effect gets its name from this story. Late at night, a policeman comes across a man on his hands and knees beneath a streetlight. He asks the obvious question, "Sir, would you mind explaining what you're up to?" "Certainly, officer. I'm looking for my house key." The police officer offers to assist with the search, and so the two men look carefully at the area beneath the streetlight, but to no avail. After quite some time has passed, the policeman asks, "Sir, are you absolutely sure that you lost your key here?" "No! I lost it somewhere in the park across the road." "Then why are you looking for it here?" "Because the light is better here." The streetlight effect describes a quest that is undertaken only for the sake of appearance. The person isn't really interested in finding the object of the quest, especially if it involves undue hardship. However, what we truly seek in life, more often than not, is to be found where it is dark and difficult to search. Prayer, then, is often like Jacob's experience of wrestling with God in the night. A further point about prayer. God always answers our prayers, even if we don't get exactly what we want. Parents cannot always give their children what they want, nor would we expect God to give us something that is harmful, even if we desire it with all our heart. In chapter 11 of Luke's Gospel, we read the words of Jesus, "What father among you, if his son asked for a fish, would hand him a snake? Or if he asked for an egg, would hand him a scorpion?" If that is how parents care for their children, how much more so will God look after his children? Let's now turn to today's parable. But firstly, let me again remind you that our English word parable comes to us from the Greek word parabole. That word is made up of para, which means next to or alongside, and bole, which comes from the Greek verb balein, which means to throw. So etymologically, our English word parable means to throw next to or alongside. So a parable seeks to shed some light on something that we know little or nothing about, or to invite us to see something in a new light. Today's parable wants to teach us something about prayer. So it throws up alongside prayer a story that we can relate to. We're then invited to go from the known to the unknown. Parables are designed to shake up one's worldview, to see things differently, to question the conventional. In the words of New Testament scholar Daniel Harrington, a parable is a form of analogy that seeks to illuminate one reality by appealing to something better known. Let's now look at the parable of the persistent widow. Some translations have her saying to the judge, "I want justice from you against my enemy." That's not the most accurate translation. The Greek word for justice is dikaiosune, but that's not the word that Luke uses here. The word that Luke uses is ekdikeeo, which means avenge. The language is juridical. In legal papyri, it has the connotation of to set things right or to be vindicated. So the widow wants vengeance. Let me say a word about how courts operated at the time of Jesus. If you had a grievance against someone, it was your responsibility to bring the charge against the person who had wronged you. You had to do it yourself. There wasn't a police force to do it for you. You then had to argue your case before a judge. The judge weighed up the evidence and decided for or against you. Judges were charged with the responsibility of hearing complaints fairly and impartially, and they adjudicated cases without the benefit of a jury. In today's parable, it appears as though the judge is reluctant even to hear the widow's case. The widow is a member of one of the most oppressed classes in Israelite society. It would seem that she is not only widowed, but also alone in the world, because it would be customary for a male member of her family to appear before the judge to plead her cause. Since she represents herself before the judge, we can presume that she does not have any sons or male relatives. The judge of the parable is everything a judge is not supposed to be. He is the antithesis of God's justice and compassion for the oppressed. There is also a lurking suspicion that the widow's opponent may have bribed the judge. Usually trials were held in village gatehouses. Listen to what the prophet Amos has to say on the subject of judges. For I know how many your crimes are, and how outrageous your sins, you oppressors of the righteous, who take bribes and thrust aside the poor at the gates. We're told that the judge has neither fear of God nor respect for man, but the widow has worn him down with her persistence. He says, "Since she keeps pestering me, I must give this widow her just rights, or she will persist in coming and worry me to death." The words worry me, as in worry me to death, are a translation of the Greek words hupopiadzeme. The Greek verb hupopiadzo means literally to hit under the eye. It's an expression borrowed from boxing, so by extension it means to give someone a black eye, to beat someone black and blue, or to smite so as to cause bruises. So this is no ordinary widow. She's obviously a very formidable woman, and the judge is quivering in fear. And I'm sure Jesus had his listeners smiling as he told this parable. So, if an unjust and self-centered judge is intimidated into action, how much more will a loving God readily answer our prayers without delay? To the prayer that is persistent and constant, we must also add the qualities of trust and patience. That reflects our belief that God answers persevering prayer when and how God wills. But that also raises the question, what happens when, despite our trust and perseverance, God appears to remain silent, when God appears indifferent to our plight? Elie Wiesel was a teenager when, in 1944, he and his family were taken from their home to the Auschwitz concentration camp, and then to Buchenwald. His book, Night, records his memories of this time spent in these camps and of the death of his family. It also gives us an insight into his despair as an observant Jew, trying to understand why God would allow such evil. He writes of an occasion on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, when thousands of inmates had come together to participate in a solemn service. The voice of the officiating inmate began with the words, "Blessed be the Almighty. Blessed be God's name." Wiesel writes of his reaction, "Blessed be God's name? Why, but why would I bless him? Every fibre in me rebelled. Because he caused thousands of children to burn in his mass graves. Because he kept 6 crematoria working day and night, including Sabbath and the holy days. Because in his great might he had created Auschwitz, Birkenau, Buna, and so many other factories of death. How could I say to him, "Blessed be thou, Almighty, Master of the universe, who chose us among all nations to be tortured day and night, to watch as our fathers, our mothers, our brothers end up in the furnaces. Praise be thy holy name for having chosen us to be slaughtered on thine altar"? The Trial of God is a play by Elie Wiesel, first published in English in 1979. Wiesel based the story on events that he witnessed first-hand as a teenager in Auschwitz. 3 rabbis, all erudite and pious men, decided one winter evening to indict God for allowing his children to be massacred. In his introduction to Wiesel's play, Robert McAfee Brown tells us that the trial lasted several nights. Witnesses were heard, evidence was gathered, conclusions were drawn, all of which issued finally in a unanimous verdict. The Lord God Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, was found guilty of crimes against creation and humankind. And then, after what Wiesel describes as an infinity of silence, the Talmudic scholar looked at the sky and said, "It's time for evening prayers." And the members of the tribunal recited Mariv, the evening service. The rabbis had found God guilty. They cannot understand why God has allowed such crimes against creation and humankind, but they continue to worship the God whose ways they cannot fathom. In the words of the late Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, religious faith does not mean having the answers. It means having the courage to ask the questions and not let go of God, as He does not let go of us. The rabbis in Auschwitz were wrestling with an ancient mystery, known in more recent times as theodicy, a term coined by one of the great philosophers and mathematicians of the 17th century, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Theodicy struggles with the tension between our belief in an all-powerful and all-loving God on the one hand, and the reality of human suffering on the other. The book of Job seeks to unravel the mystery of human suffering, but in the end, Job is forced to acknowledge that his ignorant words cannot fathom that which is beyond him. A verse from the Bengali poet Rabindranath Tagore comes to mind. "The water in a vessel is sparkling. The water in the sea is dark. The small truth has words that are clear. The great truth has great silence." Another way of reflecting upon this mystery is to consider the style of art known as pointillism. It is associated with the name of Georges Seurat. This style of art reflects the conviction that painting in dots, known as pointillism or divisionism, would produce a brighter colour than painting in strokes. So let's look at Seurat's painting, The Sideshow. It hangs in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Let's focus on one figure in the painting, the man on the right. Now let's zoom in. As you can see, the painting is made of thousands of dots of different colours. And if we zoom in further, the dots are even clearer. But if we were to focus solely on one of these dots, we would lose all sense of perspective, all sense of the whole. The dot is part of the whole. But we can only make sense of this one dot by seeing it as part of the whole. Like all analogies, this is imperfect, but it does make the point that from our limited human perspective, we cannot grasp the divine plan. And so our prayer must so often be, "Thy will be done." Jesus himself, on the night before he died, offers us the perfect example of prayer. Knowing the fate that awaits him, he prays to his Father, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup away from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." Here Jesus struggles in prayer. Yes, he struggles, because so often prayer is like wrestling with God. But his prayer is an act of radical trust in God. And so, let us heed the teaching of Jesus to pray continually and never lose heart, but also to pray in his own words, "Let your will be done, not mine."